Hi, HR Nation. It's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today we're joined by Tiffany Diehl, Director of People and OD at Forman. Tiffany, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me today, Chris.
It's nice to see you again. And always you win the award for the best background. So anyone watching the video, they'll be able to see it. People on the podcast, you guys have to check out the video to look at the background. Tiffany, fill in the gaps. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself personally and your journey to where we are today.
Well, personally, I've been living in Louisville my entire life. It's a great city. If you haven't been here, you probably know the city of Louisville most for the fastest 2 minutes in sports, which is the Kentucky Derby. So it's a bucket list item for many people. Lovely city, great place, lived other places and have returned. I have a couple of kids, one in college and studying hard, I hope today. Has a hard day at class today, and then one in high school. And I just enjoy traveling around and seeing other parts of the world. So professionally, I have started with Forman about 18 years ago. My Forman age is 18. I started several years ago in HR communications practices. And prior to that, I have a psychology background. So I'd spent time wrestling with the idea of counseling and training people and really interested in how people get along in the world and form relationships. I aspired to be a licensed clinical social worker and realized that I like control more. I would like to see the end of the process. So I took my interest in people and parlayed it into a sales career. I sold insurance and I sold cell phones back in the day when they were still in bags. They were bag phones at the time. So
bag phones. Wow. Literally you carried around a bag and took the...
No, literally the phone was in a bag that you plugged into a cigarette adapter. Yeah. So that was interesting. I'm dating myself, I'm sure, but it was, I heard a lot of no's and I learned how to handle rejection. Mm-hmm. I learned how to also
very important skill.
Learn to move forward and fail quickly because the next sale was out there, which I took into a recruiting career. I worked into a small HR accounting practice where we did consulting for HR groups within client bases. And then I started to write, and I found a passion for writing and contributed to a local magazine and started writing essentially blogs before blogs were popular. And then I was noticed for my writing skills and asked to apply for a job at Forman, where I became an HR communications specialist, mainly in compliance and benefits, and just kind of grew my career from there. So in 18 years, I've had about 9 different stops along the career path, only really having applied for one of those jobs along the way. So Forman makes it a practice of promoting internally or recognizing transferable skills in people and giving them new stretch assignments and challenges. So through employee experience and HR business partner work, most recently in workforce analytics, where I tremendous growth opportunity because I was a square peg in a round hole. And now I'm back with the people and organizational development, leading corporate groups as well as the Middle East and North Africa group called IMENA, our region, which is making my love for virtual communication just stand out. So all good there. And that brings me to today.
Wow. What a journey. I'm so happy. I love asking that question because it's always different for every single person that comes on the show. And it's always interesting as well. And I can see how those skills that you had earlier in your career with the sales and then how that must have been extremely helpful in recruitment, which is basically selling on its own. And I know being able to deal with that rejection and overcome that, I'm sure has been very helpful in your career. I know it has for me because my first 10 years of my career was in sales. So when I started this business, getting a no was normal. Failures were a daily occurrence. So it just fit with me and who I was. And so you mentioned briefly, it's very, very rare. And as you know, that we have people that stay in organizations as long as you have.
Yes. And
you've touched on a few of the reasons why you've stayed in a business so long, but what could you share a few more? You know, what's kept you in Forman 18 years? An absolutely incredible achievement, both for you and for them.
It is. And, you know, when we look at our tenure, it's around 8.5 years of service here.
Wow.
And we have just barely into the double digits of turnover. And it's certainly less than that in the US. And when I think back as to why, and I lead the engagement survey process as well, so the sentiment survey, I think that I am like so many other employees. We love the stability. We're publicly traded and family owned. So our corporate decisions are made with the Brown family in mind. That's fantastic. And a lot of stability there. We make a fun product. So if you haven't tried our brands, then you should. But if you have, then you know that there's a lot of brand loyalty. And so we tend to recruit people that typically have loyalty capabilities. And so it just is kind of our model, because we were almost open 150 years, always headquartered in Louisville, and then we've spread out globally across the nation. So you're able to innovate your career, your life, your earnings many, many times over without having to leave, which is just an amazing phenomenon, I think. So
Yeah.
part of it is the benefits and the things that I get back career-wise, lots of opportunities. Compensation isn't bad. We still have a pension plan. We have all these lucky things that make it just really an opportunity to capitalize on the benefits of Brown-Forman and support your family and love what you do.
Absolutely amazing. And one of the points that I want to highlight for everyone listening is you mentioned earlier before we started the call was the fact that they allow people with those skills to transfer to different parts of the business. And I'm sure you wouldn't. How many roles did you say you've had, or different roles since you've been? 9, right? I'm sure if you didn't have that opportunity and you were stuck within that role, you probably would have left a long time ago. Would you agree with that?
I would have. And it's interesting that you say that, because I was thinking about this podcast today and what I would recommend for anyone. And sometimes it's healthy for you. It's not that I haven't looked for other roles outside of Brown-Forman within 18 years. I've looked only to prove in that I need to stay at Brown-Forman, or to make sure that my skill set is really ramped up in case I decide that there's something else that I need to do to fulfill my career aspirations. But in every case, I've come back to the value proposition within Brown-Forman suits me best at that particular time. But you don't know if you don't look. So I don't want, because my years of service, I don't want people to think that it's not a healthy exercise to see what else is out there.
But it's because they're giving you the opportunity and flexibility, though, right? Most companies don't offer that. And I know that because I speak to them all the time and it drives me mad. And I speak to the lead and say, why did you leave? And most of the time it's because they've basically been in the same role, doing the same thing for 3, 4, 5 years. And they've been offered no opportunity to explore new skills. For example, if I asked you when you was a salesperson that, in X many years' time that you were leading the people analytics function of Brown-Forman, you probably laughed at me.
I would have, especially that particular role.
Yeah, right. You'd have been like, really? So, and that's the same. And it's because they gave you those opportunities, right? And when people are learning and they're developing, they don't look outside because they're excited. They're learning, developing. They feel like they're growing as a person, right? And that keeps them engaged, and they go above and beyond. But if you don't give people the opportunity, then naturally they're going to want to look elsewhere regardless. So
very true.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's very important for everyone to hear, especially in the day and age where, I'll be honest, the average guest that I speak to, it's every 2 years they're in a new role. And it's actually getting lower and lower and lower every single year as well.
We've seen it drop. In the US, I think the average years of service is 5 years of service, which is actually quite a bit longer than you might think. So
I think it's a lot lower in Europe, I've seen.
Is it? Yes.
Yeah. In the US, I see leaders stick around a lot longer. In Europe, it's every few years.
I've been told by my European colleagues it's because you have an entrepreneurial mindset.
Oh, that's a great way of putting it. Of course, us Europeans would say that. Yeah, we would say that. That sounds like something we would say as well. So where you are now with this new role, what's really occupying your mind on a day-to-day basis?
On a day-to-day basis, I find that, as I mentioned before, my prior roles were all building blocks to this role. And now that I'm interacting with people and talent strategies a lot more, there's a couple of things. First of all is asking the question of people, what evidence do you have? And this could be anything from when you're speaking with an employee about their own self-awareness. What evidence do you have? Well, if they tell you they've got a 360, then of course that's probably fairly reliable. If they say, well, I'm just guessing, or have they had any concrete feedback? So always asking that question. I think the second thing is an emphasis on career realities. And we have a program called Careers at Brown-Forman, which supplements the learning and training that is available in all of the functional areas called the BF way of, and insert whatever organization you're in, the BF way of sales, the Brown Forman way of marketing. And with careers, we have explored just the realities of being a flat organization. We have about 5,000 people, but the majority of people that sell our products are external to Brown Forman. So we leverage distributor organizations. We leverage sales and marketing teams in other companies that work. So we have a very lean organization in comparison with what we actually sell. So just developing that transparency, and we developed some content called Careers at Brown Forman that really explores the employee's perspective and responsibilities in terms of managing their own career, balanced with Brown Forman's realities, which are lean, dispersed, non-centralized, no clear ladder. So we gain a lot of people from larger corporations that are used to following a career ladder track that makes sense, and they have tons of evidence that people have followed the same pathway before. Ours is more like a jagged mess, which can be disconcerting to some employees, and some folks come into the organization and think, where am I going next? Great question, but we don't know. And find the beauty in that that gem
That's
of an
part of
opportunity.
what works, right?
That's
the differentiator between differentiator between what you guys do, and for example, you're a perfect example of that, of being able
It's
to.
more exploratory.
Uh-huh.
So you think about, I tried to describe it the other day as the movement of the railroad across from east to west in the United States. And at one time, someone had to decide the right pathway. They weren't confined by a roadmap. And so how did that bridge get built there and that roadway get built there? Well, somebody just decided, and they started plowing the ground to lay the tracks. And that's the way we should handle our careers.
Is that something that's always existed, or is that something which was driven internally from the leadership team?
It's a great point. I think in some functional areas, it just suits better to have a more direct career path. Finance, IT, sometimes HR even, we're less flexible. But for the most part, we have changed our organization in 10 to 12 years. It doesn't even look the same. We owned a consumer products organization. We had Lennox, China, and Hartman Luggage in the past. We divested our interest in those to focus on what we do best, our spirits and wines. And at that particular juncture, we had to remain adept. That was the first signal to, I think, our employee base at the time that adaptability and flexibility are what's going to keep us successful. And we use a phrase here called building forever. And so our mantra is, how will this build forever? How will we stay independent? How will we stay open? How will we stay successful? You just can't sit back and wait for things to happen to you.
Yeah, and we see all the disruption that's going on in industry, and a lot in your industry actually, yes, as well. And your model allows you to move a lot quicker.
It does.
Than these organizations, and react. Mm-hmm. Right? And as opposed to, by the time most of these organizations react, they're out of business. And we're seeing that all around us every week, actually, or every month. You hear about a new company. It's a reality now. And I think naturally, even if it wasn't by design, your model allows for that, because you can move people into new roles if needed. You can grab those skills and transfer it over to where it's needed in the organization. And that's just part of the culture as well. Your employees aren't going to be shocked like most companies would, because that's naturally built into your culture, right? Into your why as a business. So very interesting. As part of that, we spoke before and you sent over some details. You talk about how everyone has high potential. Could you touch upon that?
I know you've spoken to Alan Colquitt in the past, and he is a peer friend of mine, but he calls himself the chief HR disruptor. And I feel like we agree in the sense that sometimes you have to ask yourself or ask your team why you're using certain conventions, and do they actually apply? Now, a consultant may have recommended them. There might be tons of research. So I realize challenging the concept of HiPo or high potential is risky. But in our organization, what we found is that high potential or potential in anyone recognizing it is it's mostly held by the employee themselves. There are observational characteristics. However, I can choose to unleash my potential on the organization at any time I want. I will withdraw to if I need to put it toward my family or a loved one or running a marathon or taking care of a sick parent. I will I will transfer my motivations. So my potential for growth can shift. And when we identify rising stars or that top box in the 9 box, what we realized was, we were sort of repeatedly placing people in these areas where we were missing these emerging leaders, the unseen folks in the organization, that if they were just given an opportunity to try on that glass slipper, that they'd run with it. And we've actually used that sort of reference to make sure that more people are seen. And frankly, the busy people, the people that are investing in our company, aren't looking for a new opportunity within Brown-Forman. They're heads down working, actually. They're doing the job that they've been assigned to do. So it's our job as leaders and as HR teams to highlight and bring those people to the forefront during succession planning activities, talent review processes, whatever process you use. So they're understood more and known. Everybody wants to be relevant.
I completely agree with you. And I've been thinking about this for a long time. So when I saw that come up, I was like, oh, I really want to talk about this. Because I think I myself was a perfect example. The first 2 years in my sales career, I was very average, barely getting by, doing the minimum amount of sales. Definitely wasn't in that list of HiPos. But a few personal things happened in my life. And I came back with a kind of renewed energy, and kind of told myself over a break that I had a few months off, and I came back and said, you know what, I'm going to go all in on this, because I spent 2 years just kind of going through the motions. I started taking my career seriously. I started, reading a lot of sales books, going to workshops, really invested in my own personal development. It almost became my own obsession about, the psychology of sales. I kind of read every book that was out there. And you could say that by the end of that year, I was definitely a HiPo, and I ended up becoming one of the most successful salespeople in that business and broke most records in sales. But those first 2 years, I definitely wouldn't have been on that list of high potentials. And I've had loads of employees. I had 25 sales staff working beneath me just before I left. And there's so many stories I can tell you of people that have been with us for a few, 3-4 years, that something just clicked, or something happened personally, or, there's something they just wouldn't, there's something that was blocking that I kind of finally identified. I had a guy on my team who had a manager below me who was just managing him the wrong way. And he wasn't incentivizing the right way. Didn't understand him and the motivations, or the fact that the reason he's not working hard for the last few months is because he's had a really bad personal situation and he's going through a divorce. No one asked that question, and it's affected him for the last few years. Sat down, had that conversation, and then all of a sudden he becomes one of the most successful guys in our business. And on the data never tells the story, the full picture and the full story. That's where the managers and the leaders need to come in and work with them. So I've seen it so many times. It does frustrate me when I hear HiPo. The data doesn't always tell the full story.
Well, and what's interesting about the story that you told is it's very typical, but what you've really described is performance, not necessarily potential. You described that this employee had a period of performance that, and I noticed that the leaders often confuse potential with performance. In fact, the model itself is based on potential and performance. And how do you measure? I mean, one of them is a lagging indicator, the performance piece. You can only look back and see how someone performed in a prior year. And the other part is just ambiguous and dependent upon the human state of mind at that particular moment. So it's highly inaccurate. But all this planning is inaccurate until the job is open and someone's made the offer and they actually accept it and move on. So it's all inaccurate. So
Or the amount of times that you think that people come in that I've made hires and thinking, this is going to be one of the best hires I've ever made. And they come in and it's so all the right signs, tick all the boxes, and then all of a sudden it's the people that I didn't expect that flourish and come through. It is definitely not an exact science. I'm worried sometimes that the data sometimes gets in the way of that, and some people get left behind. Because my old company had a real terrible habit of promoting the best salespeople as managers, which went terribly wrong. Because just because you're a high performing salesperson doesn't mean you're good at leading people or being a leader. Actually, in a lot of cases, the opposite set, because a lot of really high performing salespeople are quite selfish, and they just, because they've been literally trained to be the number one. I'm going to be on the top of the leaderboard, and then you put them in a leadership position and ask them to delegate. All of a sudden, it goes very, very wrong as well. So,
sure. I heard you talk about that with Tony.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Yeah, it's
exactly.
very true. And what got you there may not keep you there. So it's very
Exactly. And
true.
I really struggled with that personally, I'll be honest. When I became,
Hmm.
I was like, I had no training and I was like, oh, wow, I've got to now delegate all of this. I'm not the guy doing it and I've got to work with everyone. It was really tough.
Scary.
Yeah. You also talk about the seeing the unseen leaders. Can you elaborate
Hmm.
on that?
Yeah. So I don't think we're unique, but we typically hire people with experience. In the job market today, you can afford to. And so while people are busy learning their roles or developing themselves or doing what they're paid to do, they're showing leadership qualities that may not be seen to others. And the if you've ever looked at any social networking or looked at how people connect with one another, and I know that there's some compliance issues with people performing those studies, but it simply investing a little bit of time in your environment by asking who do you talk to and who are you with, you'll find these mavens, these people that are central to the organization, probably not where we're looking and where we're developing and where we're worried about succession planning, but right below that level are just these people below the surface that are ready to burst through. And I think that the key to sustainable organizations, decreasing turnover, is identifying those people before they leave and burst through in another organization. And so, where are they, and how do you find them, and how do you give them enough of recognition and encouragement to continue what they're doing well, with the balance of the career realities, whatever those might be, and identify the gaps. If I could stop. Not stop, but equally sustain development at high levels. It's extremely important. But as we all know, if you've ever been through a reorg, it's never really the first position that is the most disruptive to the org, because you have a lot of people vying for those higher roles. There's more money.
Yeah.
They're probably oblivious to the trade-offs associated. They think they want it, those kinds of things. And then it's usually the disruption in the second and third level. And even below the third level down from that major change, you'll find this emerging leader that is saying, "Why not me?" So we have employed basically an analytic process. We're adding some science to the art of knowing people. That's another thing of being a smallish company. You have this ability to really have some people to people interactions that you can rely upon, but we're adding some science by using our human capital management system. And we ask 4 questions of people, of managers, and it's supposed to represent the result of an intentional career conversation. And
Can you share those? Do
those
you know? I'm
questions.
putting you up to put you on the spot. Do you?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the 4 questions that we ask are, one is, what is the next level of the employee? So in the next 2 to 3 years, are they willing to make the trade-offs for a change in role? It doesn't mean that they will actually grow up. It's not a promotion question. One is about retention risk. So the typical thing that you might ask, but our labelings are different. They're like, I'm unsure. We give managers the ability to say I'm unsure, or
Okay.
it's high, medium, or low. What is the impact of loss? So if the person leaves or moves on, what is the impact to the organization? And this is not a personal characterization of the employee. It's really about the role. Do we have a developed succession plan? Is the local university equipping people to take those roles? Is it a common role that we typically recruit for? And the last one is readiness, which is the most important one. It's funny. So instead of using, potential ratings about high, medium, and low potential,
Yeah.
what we look at is readiness for movement. So as someone, and our labels are they ready later? So it suggests that they're not ready now. Maybe they love what they're doing, or maybe they're new to their role, or maybe there's maybe it's personal disruption. So, and we give employees the freedom to say, I'm ready later. It's not, I'm not ready ever, which is what low potential would suggest. It's ready later. Then ready.
I love that you give them that option, by the way. That's great.
Yeah, and again, it kind of gets back to everyone has potential. We're just kind of wiping all that away. But are
Yeah.
you ready to do something
Yeah.
with it is the true overall question. Then the middle one is ready enough, which I love this one. This came from our CHRO. Are you ready enough to, if the right role and the right environment will sustain you, are you ready to make that leap forward, or leap over, or to take on a new challenge? And as you might have experienced in your own, if you're a salesperson in a particular market that's established, you might be ready enough. But if you are asked to lead an entrepreneurial region where there is no infrastructure, are you equipped? You may not be. So we give this ready enough for some things, but maybe not all. And then, of course, ready now. These are the people that are well established. They have mastered their skill set. They're training others. They are considered a subject matter expert. And it's not just based on skill capability. We subscribe to the idea that it's not the what only, it's the how as well. And so what behavior attributes are they showing that they can truly handle disruption, handle the trade-offs, move to something new? Are they curious? Or do they have learning agility? Do they have professional presence? All of those other things that might go into it. And so those are the 4 questions that we ask. And then from those results, first of all, they can be updated on a day-to-day basis if you want to. We don't recommend day trading on those types of attributes. But if someone moves roles or they change their aspiration to do something else, then they get changed. And then we plot those people. It's not on a 9-box grid. It looks a little bit differently because it's based on leadership level. And so people typically, once they are in that swim lane, so to speak, from across the axis, then they stay in there and they just bounce back through readiness. A big revelation for me was when I looked at some of our executive leadership team, and when we looked at the 9-box grid placement of them, they were correctly placed. I was like, wait a minute, they're in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the middle of the 9-box grid, and I thought that does not suggest that anything. And so if a COO role came up, would our CFO be able to go into that? Well, we wouldn't necessarily recognize that because they were correctly placed. We had done a good job about putting them in the current role that they're in. And so much of it is about seeing the unseen people across this matrix, looking across your organization without assigning them this inert categorization.
I'm with you. And when you are in a position where you want to get but you can go as a role field, you can go and see who's ready, who's currently in position,
yes,
who's perhaps not ready right now, but could be in the future. So you have all of that available to you.
Well, you do. And you essentially have done a lot of the heavy lifting as an HR team. If you're exploring that and asking what the evidence is, then you already can walk into a meeting and say, Chris is a candidate. He's ready enough. How do we fill the gaps? How do we prepare him for success? And what learning and experiences does he need in order to be successful in that role, whatever that role might be? So while we're using it for succession planning, it is also able to be referred to for organizational changes or unexpected vacancies, or when someone promotes, that domino effect occurs. So I'm real hopeful about it.
How does it look like for the employees? They get to receive a link via email, or they'd log in? What is just out of curiosity, what does that user experience look like? I'm just always interested.
That's great question. They do not actually participate in the actual tech behind answering those questions. What they're asked to do is have this intentional career conversation with their managers, and the managers are expected to ask them these questions. And then they go into the system and they actually select the answers. We have about 87% participation on our organization. So we have data on 87% of our org, which is fantastic results because it's less than 6-7 months old. Mm-hmm. But what we found is that employees who are having that courageous conversation, they are going back to their managers and asking, what did you put in the system regarding me? I don't know if we'll change that in the future. It's still a manager's responsibility to make those discernments and to make the decision. So ultimately their perspective, but at least now we're involving the employee in their own future.
What's the manager's reaction to this? Because obviously they're having to take full ownership, right? I think that's a big part of it, because unless you prepare for them for it, because I'm sure this is quite a new thing. Would that be fair to say? Is that for your managers to go in and have these interviews, have these conversations, take these, having to ask those questions and make sure they go and put all of it into the system? Right. What did that look like?
I think that it's provided some, it's kind of like a safety blanket. Managers, as we described earlier in the podcast, sometimes are given a management responsibility without a whole lot of detail about how to do it. And so it runs concurrently with our performance management process. And so they should already be speaking to their employees at the time. So it's a natural fit. I would think, and I have some evidential support, but I would think that if managers were rejecting it, they just would opt out and not do it. And we have a very small percentage of people that haven't done it. It's a very quick task that represents a larger discussion. And it sent the signal, I think, to managers that they should be asking these things. They should not be afraid to learn that someone wants to stay put or to move forward or to move over. that they're going to do it anyway. Employees will find a way to satisfy their career needs anyway. This is just a little bit of a documentation. So how it liberates is, I think these things, in answer to your question, these things were always happening. But now we're able to share them more broadly across functional areas, across our matrices, and globally to HR leaders, so that if I am aware of a job that is unknown to people that's happening in a certain market or region, I can go in and find out who's there and what capabilities they have and what interests do they have about moving forward.
Mm-hmm. So these are the things that, the reason I'm asking so many questions around it, these are the things that are really adding value to the business.
Yes.
From a HR perspective, right?
Well, we would never make a brand or product or market decision without collecting evidence and thoughts. We would see if the consumer was motivated to go there and to buy Jack Daniel's, for instance. Well, we should expect the same thing regarding our talent.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm glad I asked that now.
Yeah.
And is it something you guys built yourselves, or is this pretty standard stuff that exists within
Again,
platforms?
I'm an HR disruptor. So I spent probably 15 months researching best practices and thinking about whether or not I was courageous enough to bring it forward. So it's internal, it's self-built. I have I've shared it with peer groups to stress test it. Very smart people that have been classically trained in HR and to detect whether or not it was even plausible. I realize it's a big giant that I'm facing. I feel like sort of David and Goliath, because it is to put the power within the people's hands of saying whether or not they're interested and motivated is kind of different. We usually do that from a top-down perspective.
Sure. But that's what you guys need to be doing. And anything that's worth doing is going to be tough.
Very true.
But I'm sure, based on what you've just shared with us, that you're going to be getting a lot of messages from our listeners and the HR leaders there. How do you do it? You're going to get a lot of LinkedIn messages from everyone asking how you did that as well. Very, very interesting. You talk about the value of understanding the psychometric type of your audience.
Right.
It kind of goes in talks with what we've just spoken about a little bit. Could you share details on that?
Well, part of it is the newness of me being certified in several different areas of psychometrics measurements recently. And with my psychology background, I always pay particular interest. But what I find really curious, and maybe an avenue for development and expansion for the whole HR practice, is to encourage people to sort of own their personality type, their emotional intelligence, whatever it is. And for us to be able to know the audience a little bit more and know how to get the win from them. And much of it is based upon human interaction and communication. And so if I know the balance of introversion and extroversion in my audience, I can deliver and manage and lead and motivate according to what they need, which is the name of the game. It's not about my self-importance or how I like to lead. We always ask that question in assimilations, what's your management style? Well, a good manager will say, whatever my employees need. And so in some cases, they're not in tune with what they need. And so psychometric evaluations and other measurements, even 360s, help them understand who they are and be proud of that. And we believe, I'm sure it's not uncommon, that, more minds make better decisions than just a single person, a single thinker, and diversity and inclusion of different thought types. And they need to know themselves, the employees do, the managers need to know them. And I think that these evaluations just put some really stress test science behind it.
Yeah, and you would think, and I'm hoping this is just common practice in most businesses, but I'm sure it's still not. When I first came across that in some of my manager training, many years later after I became manager, which I had it in the beginning, it was like a big eye opener. I was like, oh wow. And I immediately came out of that training and I could see every single person of my team, and I already knew.
Yes.
But straight away, I didn't sort of guess. I did ask them to take the actual test after, but I kind of could see exactly how I'd been making mistakes by managing, James. James is an introvert. I shouldn't be managing in this way. And AJ is definitely an extrovert. This is exactly how. And I was like, it was such a big eye opener for me, and it really, really helped.
It drives efficiency, and I think we want to be relevant and known for who we are, and we also want to get our work done so that we can go play however you play in your world, and it just makes things more efficient. And if you internalize your learning, that's great. But if you internalize and are and confident enough to share what you've learned about yourself, and
Mm-hmm.
that comes with trust, and that comes with respect, a respectful environment. And I realize not every company has that, but if you can um, sort of wear it as a badge of honor, I am a ENTJ, or I am
Mm-hmm.
whatever you are, people will know you better and will hopefully be willing to meet you in the middle, and teams will form better,
Yep.
which drives excellence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love what you mentioned earlier about the diversity of perspective. It's so
Mm-hmm.
important because that's where the best innovation comes from.
Mm-hmm. It
And
does.
if we all sit in the room and we're all thinking the same, then the outcomes are going to be the same as well. So
Right.
I love having meetings with my team in the morning and getting everyone's impact on how we can improve
Mm-hmm.
on that. And all of a sudden, it created a really cool, interesting energy in the room. And some of the best
Mm-hmm.
innovations that we had as a team. In fact, we took it so far that we would actually sit down with our clients and would go through our sort of proposals and identify um, which of our clients fit into those categories. And then we
Mm-hmm.
adapted actually some of our sales
Great.
presentations around those, because we know this week we're selling our IT event. So we know that there's going to be a lot more introverts in that. And we need that they're going to be making decisions based around data, as opposed to the marketing team who were pitching the marketing event is going to be more about the picture, selling the picture and painting a picture about the event and what it's going to look like. And it was very different. And it started really
Yeah.
helping us as well. So yeah, I think that's a
I
very
would say
important.
though that, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, there's about 80% should speak to the archetype,
Mm-hmm.
what you expect, and leave about 20% for that person that may be the marketing person that it considers themselves really creative and innovative, but they might be learning to be more analytical. So you have to always incorporate
I'm
just
seeing
a
that
little
of HR
bit.
leaders right now.
It's very, very true. And so I've gone into meetings before where I, had the PowerPoint presentation with one word on it, and they were like, "Where's the data?" Because they expected data from me, and I thought, well, I thought you expected pictures from me. So
Yeah, you've got to
you'll
be
find
careful.
yourself in
Yeah.
the case of doing one or the other. It's kind of like a buffet restaurant. You have to appeal
Yeah.
to everyone.
Yeah,
So
fantastic. Well, look, that's been amazing, Tiffany. I'm so excited we had you on the show. Before we
thank
wrap
you.
up, it leads us quite nicely onto our quick fire round. You
Okay,
probably know it. Probably know how this goes by now
I
if you've
do.
listened to any of the other
I'm
episodes
nervous.
as well. So 5 questions, no longer than 30 seconds to give us some amazing answers.
Okay.
What was the number one thing that was holding you back in your career?
I gave this a little bit of thought. Probably my opinion, and I'll say that earlier in my career, I believed everybody needed to hear it. And I don't necessarily
That's great.
disagree, but I think that what I've learned over the years has been that if I state my beliefs and tell people why, but then follow up, take it just one step further and ask people what they think, and authentically represent that I'm interested in what they think, then
Hmm.
I think better decisions are made.
Yeah.
So I was a pre-planner. I would get everything all sorted out before going to the meeting, going to the project. And yeah, I thought I was creating efficiency, but what I was doing was limiting creativity. So it's got to be a balance.
But it's so huge that you identified that in yourself. And
Mm.
it's so important, that one question of just saying to someone, what do you think?
What do you think?
It seems like a
Mm-hmm.
small thing, but it's huge. So I'm
It
gonna,
is.
and I definitely, I've been guilty of that myself. What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
Again, it's about personality type. Is know what you're known for. And well, I'll have to give reference to my dad. Best piece of advice was first up the hill, always get shot. Now that sounds pretty negative, but make sure that what you're driving up the hill for is worth the risk. Is really kind of the application for that, and know what you stand for and why. I think are the two pieces of advice that I've leaned on most often.
Fantastic. What's one book do you recommend to our audience and why?
Funny, I have two. So I mentioned Alan Colquitt before, but I like
Hmm.
his Next Generation of Performance Management.
Yep.
Super, scientific nerd, but funny, and just it comes through. It's
Yeah.
it's the most fun book I've ever read on performance management. Let me tell you that. And then one for fun, and one is, it's simple. It's called The Energy Bus by John Gordon. And he has a whole series of positive, motivating ways to fuel your life work and with positive energy. And I personally develop energy from people. And so in times of my career where I haven't had a whole lot of meaningful people interaction, cultivating that energy and staying positive about whatever's going on is fun. So it's a real easy one to give out to people and to explain teamwork.
Yeah.
It reads easy. So it's just fun
Fantastic. I'll
stuff.
check it
Yeah.
out. And can you share one internet resource that you use on a daily basis to keep up to date current events, keep efficient, connect?
HR support groups on Facebook, but I also
Mhm.
I really
Do you use
and
Facebook? That's a good question. I want to talk about that for a
yeah,
second because I've always wondered. We, as a team as well,
yeah,
do people use Facebook? And the HR leaders use Facebook. You do,
they do. They
yeah?
do, and
Mainly groups, I'm assuming.
it
Group,
is.
basically.
It's
Okay.
a group, and it's
Is it
I don't
private group or open group?
it's an open group, but there are stipulations for membership. You have
Sure.
to
Be an actual
ask reasonable
be a
questions.
practitioner
Yeah,
and not be
post
selling
your
solutions every 10 seconds.
exactly.
Yeah.
So there's no solution selling because the administrator sort of wraps
Good.
those up. We get those,
That's
but
great.
yeah. So you get to sort of touch base with a wide scope of leaders and
Mhm.
hear what the questions are. You feel like you can help people solve problems. So I've spoken a lot about succession planning or key employee identification, helped people out with resumes or compensation negotiation.
Cool.
So that it's kind of fun
Mm.
for that purpose. And then there's similar things that are in LinkedIn. They tend to be a little bit more professional. I
Yeah.
love to read the articles that people tend to forward, meaning they've curated them for me, and people that I respect that are in my network, they'll send them forward. So
Yeah.
about 10 to 15 minutes per day, I'll spend sort of perusing what people have liked that I respect in the
Uh-huh.
HR profession.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn do a pretty good job of just showing you what you want to see.
True.
Which
Yes.
is that's tough to do. So
Mhm.
with so much going on in the feed, they're getting really good at it, right? Because whoever you like, comment, and share on, then they just show you those people, right, with
Yeah.
the algorithm. But it's getting better and better now. The fact that it's almost dangerous though, because you can go on there and there's so many things that are relevant because they're so good at doing it. You can kind of get caught
Absolutely.
up in that world. No, I've got to get back to work.
Right.
Just to
The
work as
other
well.
and there's another one that I read. It's called The Skim. I don't know if you subscribe to
Skim.
The Skim.
No, I don't know.
SKIMM.
Okay.
Designed by two journalists, and it curates the world's news
Cool.
in one blog post and has
Oh
links out for
wow.
further
What
reading. So
on a daily? Is it a daily post?
daily.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
So it's kind of just condensing everything into one blog post in what daily. Okay.
It
Definitely
is.
check that
Yeah.
out as well. What's one thing about your business that most excites you today?
Oh, regional expansion, geographical and regional expansion. Last night I was on a call at 9 p.m. with China and Singapore and Japan and Australia, and just the global employment community is just so super exciting. And I know other companies have experienced this more earlier in their history, but it's a real turning point for Brown Forman, and it's been
Hmm.
in the works for about the past decade. And I'm fully immersed in that now, and it's just super fun. Just to
Amazing. Well, it's
be
always fun when you're growing, right?
It is. It's fun when you're growing and interacting, growing and thinking.
Yeah.
Before we would have thought we couldn't meet together unless we flew
Uh-huh.
everyone in and met person to person. I've
Yeah.
done virtual assimilations recently for leaders that worked fantastically because people are used to it. I'm
It's
very
almost
excited about
common
that
now.
too.
It's
It
I
is.
always feel like I know people. Like when I meet people that I've had on the podcast or people like yourself that I feel like I know them already. It's
Right.
so strange now. I met Matt Burns recently. Flew over from
Mm.
Canada, came to the office. And I was like, I feel like I already know. I knew the moment I met him. I was like, I've been spoke to you about 50 times
That's
via
great.
video call. It is quite strange because if you remember
Absolutely.
when you first ever jumped on a video call, it was awkward. It was a bit like, it's just, most people in this generation will think we're crazy for talking like this about it. But I remember jumping on my first video call thinking, this is weird.
Yeah.
This is so strange. We definitely won't be doing this at work. So,
We're
yeah.
newscasters, with flip flops and
Yeah.
shorts and a nice top.
Yeah, exactly. We've come a long way. We've come a long
Right.
way
That's very true.
as well. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's been a real pleasure, and you've
Thank you,
definitely shared
Chris.
some great actionable advice. So I know our listeners will be a lot more better off for it. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Chris.
Before we part ways, if there's one piece of advice you can give to all of the HR leaders out there, what would that be? And also, what's the best way for them to reach out to you if they have any questions or want to connect?
I think the best piece of advice would be to always question the question. Ask people what evidence they have and find out where they're coming from, and question the common practices that you may have been using. It's just always good to prove them in.
Mhm.
And the best way to reach me is you can reach me through LinkedIn or my personal email address that's on my LinkedIn page. I'm here at Brown Forman. So Tiffany_Diehl at b-f.com.
Fantastic. Well, guys, you heard it here. If you want all of the details, you can head over to hrdealers.com. There you'll find the show notes on episode. Everything we've been talking about, all of the resources that Tiffany mentioned will all be linked in there for you to make things easier. Thank you again, Tiffany,
You're
for sharing
welcome.
your experience with us. And we wish you all the best until next week.
Great. Thank you.